Today on K-Train Garage, I want to give you some tips that I found useful when doing the exhaust manifold on my E46 325xi. To do everything we need to do, I removed the windshield cowl tray and the engine cover. I also removed the windshield washer reservoir and secondary air pump, as well as the secondary air valve from the front of the engine. This is what it looks like with the reservoir, secondary air, and the manifold gone. I'll show you the sockets that I use, but this air conditioner line, it gets very in the way, but I didn't want to have to disconnect it, and I was able to work around it. With that stuff out of the way, you can work on getting the nuts off that hold the manifold to the head. I found a 3+1 extension on a long socket works good to make sure that you can reach the whole way onto the nut, because sometimes the nuts come down on it pretty far, and still loosen it out of there. You can see here on the removed manifold, the end of the extension, if I put my extensions together like this, is just past. I'd recommend doing that if you're going to use a manual ratchet to get it off. I would make sure you go at it straight. If you don't go at it straight, I stripped this one when I was trying to use a socket extension elbow, and because I wasn't on it straight, I started stripping it and then it just continued. There are 8 studs and nuts that hold each of the 2 manifolds on. Bank 1 and bank 2. Bank 2 is shorter. If you're doing this, you're going to find bank 1 is in front of some of the nuts for bank 2. So if you're only doing bank 2, bank 1 is going to be in the way. So you may just want to take all the fasteners off and refresh all the fasteners when you're doing that. When removing these manifolds, you should remove the oxygen sensors. I highly recommend getting an oxygen sensor socket. It lets you pass it over the wire and get a good firm grip on there to break it free of the exhaust. Once it's broken free, you could probably remove it by hand or just with anything. Before you can drop these manifolds, once you've gotten some nuts loose, you need to disconnect them from the rest of the exhaust. There's a bolt similar to this that will hold both of the flanges together for the rest of the exhaust and the manifold. You want to get some new gaskets. If you put any miles on since the last time you did some work or had some exhaust work, you're going to need new gaskets at the manifold flange where it meets the rest of the exhaust. Factory has the bolt inserted into the flange, but you can see on mine they've been removed from previous maintenance. So if that's the case, you're almost for sure going to need to hold on to the head of the bolt if you can see that it's hexagonal in shape, to be able to get that off of there. Like we said, when reinstalling, you want new gaskets, and you want at least new copper exhaust nuts. The salvage that I got, the reasonable mileage salvage for the replacement manifold that I'm going to put on, it's in much better shape than what I have. So the bolts that are inserted in there, they're pretty good. Threads, pretty good. So I'm just going to use that. So I only need nuts in this case, but there are part numbers for bolts if you need them. Before you can actually maneuver the exhaust manifold out from the side of the engine, you need to remove the right side engine mount and the right side engine bracket. If you watch the other videos, you've seen me work around there. If you have not, if you take the nut off the top where the arm attaches, and then take out the 4 bolts on the arm, and then that will just come off. But you need to support the engine when doing that, and I'll show you. If you have a hoist or a support bar, you can attach here to hold up the front end of the engine. It's not a ton of weight, but you need to make sure that it doesn't sag down and damage the suspension for the transmission. I've added some wood to my transmission jack and leveled it out so that I can support the subframe and remove it by myself. I was able to lower the subframe because I disconnected the linkage for the sway bar. I took the nut off for the inner ball joint for the lower arm, and I just got it free. So that gave me enough room so that I could disconnect the ball joint on the outboard of the lower arm. So that way, when I take out the 4 bolts that holds the subframe up, that holds the engine, the arm and the steering, it can come down. That will come down, but because it's an XI and we have front wheel drive, the front axle and the whole wheel and front strut, that can stay together and it will stay up here even when I let the subframe down. The only other thing you need to do that is to remove the retaining nut on the engine mount on the left side. And then if you have something like a transmission jack or a regular jack and put some wood on it, then you can let this down and get the manifold out right here once you've removed the engine mount and engine arm. Once you've done that, you can get the new exhaust up in there and put the subframe up, and that whole step shouldn't take you very long. A few notes for reinstalling the manifold. If the studs came out when you removed the nuts, I brushed these the best I could given the angles, and I put penetrating oil there, but a lot of these just came right out. The whole stud with the nut, and now it's jammed with rust. So I'm replacing all 16 studs and using new copper fasteners. Similar to the manifold flange to the rest of the exhaust, if you put any kind of miles on since the last time you've done this, or especially in my case, it's been a very long time, then you want to replace these. The top separated from here, but it's the same. It's the same part number for both manifold gaskets. These studs are on the M54 engine. The exhaust studs are M7 1.0 pitch. A good way to install them, if you're doing this at home, is to put two nuts together. You can just go to the store, get M7 1.0 nuts, and tighten them against each other on the end. Then you can drive it in to the head until it's snug and free it with an open-end wrench. And then just take both those nuts off and then use the copper fasteners for the manifold. To improve your ability to take this apart in the future, if you put exhaust anti-seize, the copper stuff, on the flange bolts and on the exhaust studs, it's going to be a lot easier to take apart and less likely to corrode to the point where you can't get it apart without potentially damaging the head. Same goes true for the lambda probes for the oxygen sensors before and after the CAT. But if you're going to do that, I always try to make sure that I put a moderate amount, but I try to stay on the threads. I try to stay away from the probe bulb just to make sure that it works as effectively as it can. Copper anti-seize can help a lot to remove probes in the future if you're going to need to. I hope the notes on this job help you to change the exhaust on your XI. Thanks for watching.